interesting. And what else? Many nice devotees have been writing me from the Sangha. Nice to hear from all of you, and it's nice to be with you. So let's go ahead and take the questions.
Okay, so the first question is from Madhumangal Radhakanta, and he asks, this is a follow-up on something that he asked, I think last week or 2 weeks ago. He says, was Krishna-Balaram worshipped as they are now before Srila Prabhupada established their temple in Vrindavan? Are there any other temples specifically devoted to Krishna-Balaram before Srila Prabhupada built their temple? Oh, you can't hear me? Oh, is it breaking up?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Was Krishna-Balaram worshipped?
It looks like yeah, it seems like your internet connection is a little weak. Are you on the Wi-Fi or did you do it through the phone?
Let me see here. Yeah, I'm on the Wi-Fi. It should be good.
Okay. So basically, Madhumangal is asking if Krishna Balaram was worshipped before Prabhupada established the Krishna Balaram Mandir in Vrindavan, and are there any other temples specifically devoted to Krishna Balaram before Prabhupada, and is the Krishna Balaram worship unique to our lineage?
Well, the worship of Krishna Balaram is hardly unique to our image, to our lineage. And within our lineage, for that matter, it's more of, I would say, an exception rather than the norm, at least in later periods. That's changing now since Prabhupada established the Krishna Balaram temple. There are quite a few Krishna Balaram temples within Gaudiya Vaishnavism, largely within ISKCON, within Gaudiya Vaishnavism, but there are quite a few. So a wave of that sentiment certainly rose up in Prabhupada's presence, understandably. But prior to that, in the very early days of the Sampradaya, then Krishna Balaram worship was quite the norm amongst the immediate followers of Nityananda Prabhu in particular. So there were a dozen or so more lineages in which worship of Krishna Balaram was central, and Sakyarasa was the ideal. Later, with the passing of Nityananda Prabhu from the world and most of his associates, Janava, the consort of Nityananda Prabhu, the principal consort, became prominent, and through her in the line of Nityananda Prabhu, Madhurya Rasa then became prominent to this extent that, for good or sometimes not that good reasons, Krishna Balaram worship and Sakyabhav receded to the background. So much so that it was like surprising, if you will, or an exception, as I said earlier, for Prabhupada to establish Krishna Balaram worship with Krishna Balaram in the central altar, and for that sentiment to be so prominently to so prominently appear in the lineage. But you have to put it all together, if you will, and see that it's not that much of an exception. But aside from that, of course, Krishna Balaram worship is not a new thing. It's not relative to our sampradaya. Our sampradaya is rooted in the entire tradition, if you will. The Bhagavad clearly establishes that Krishna and Balaram are the well, it refers to really the Krishna avatar, if you will. Although he's the avatari, he avatars, or he appears in the world. That's referred to in the Bhagavatam, and I believe in the first canon of the third chapter, the Krishna-Balarama avatar. So the two of them together, if you will. Gaudiya Goswami made the comment that if Balaram hadn't appeared, Krishna wouldn't have had any fun in Vrindavan. It would have been disappointing to him. So, so it's hardly a new or Gaudiya Vaishnava form of worship. But then again, the overall, the whole idea of serving Krishna in Vrindavan is not something that's that prominent, and therefore Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was thought kind of to have opened the gates, if you will, and to make that secret circulated everywhere and make it much more well known. There are instances or examples cited by the Goswamis of devotees attaining Sakyarasa prior to Gaudiya Vaishnavism and Madhurya Rasa, of course, as well. So the worship of Krishna and Balaram is not a new thing. It's not a Gaudiya exclusive sentiment. And in Vrindavan, there are some temples of Krishna and Balaram. I have been to a couple of them and know of a third. There is a disciple of one of Prabhupada's godbrothers. I forget his name, the godbrother, but the disciple's name is Madhusudan Maharaj, and I believe he took sannyas from Narayan Maharaj. And he seems to have, I've not been there, but seems to have acquired a small Krishna Balaram temple in Vrindavan. Puri Goswami Maharaj, Pramod Puri Goswami Maharaj, acquired a Balaram temple quite a few years back. And it was renovated, owned by a devotee from living in Calcutta, and the Balaram deity there was very famous. And there were quite a few stories about his leelas, how he expressed himself. So it came under the care of Puri Goswami Maharaj, who established the deity of Krishna along with Balaram. And there was another famous temple there. There was a lady, I forget her name now, who was inherited quite a bit of money from the Doris Duke. Those of you who live in North Carolina have been to the Duke Gardens, perhaps. Sometimes you've taken me, some of you. It's a very nice setting there. But she inherited a lot of money from Doris Duke, and she spent a lot of that in Vrindavan, renovating places and so forth. And she either acquired or got very involved, at least in renovating a rather large Krishna Balaram temple there. And I had the opportunity to go there and have the darshan while it was under renovation. So there are some temples of Krishna Balaram. Now, the particular pose of Krishna Balaram that you see at the Krishna Balaram Mandir of Prabhupada, that's now showing up, as I said, in a number of places like Ardauji Gopal and in Madhavan and a number of places within ISKCON. That's coming exclusively from Prabhupada's heart. You won't find deities like that with Balaram with his arm on Krishna's shoulder and so forth. Krishna with his flute held over his chest. Very charming. So that's a little bit of the history of the worship of Krishna and Balaram. Certainly, I would say our sampradaya, much more than any other Vaishnava sampradaya, has emphasized that due to the fact that in this sampradaya, Balaram is so prominent in the form of Nityananda Ram. Hope that helps. Krishna Balaram ki jai.
Yeah. So the next question is from Sham Sundar. He says, Guru Maharaj, I'll try to go slower and then let's leave a little pause after the question. Guru Maharaj, you speak often of your sannyasa-initiation, but at lunch we realized in Madhuvan we don't know much about your previous two.
Well, I disagree with you. I don't think I do speak much about my sannyasa initiation, but I think that I've been asked about it a couple of times, and there is a little bit of a story to it that I've told. And so yeah, comparatively, I've been spoken about my Harinam initiation or mantra diksha, but there's not as much of a story to those events either. Really, not much to be said. I mean, I joined the mission of Prabhupada 3 months before I was initiated in the Santa Cruz Mountains of California, about 6 or 7, 8 hours from Los Angeles. And while I was living there, Los Angeles was the last place you would want to go in the circles in which I orbited, if you do the orbit of my life. We were leaving the world anyway. For Krishna consciousness, you go anywhere, right? And so that when Prabhupada came to Los Angeles, I didn't hesitate to go. The devotees wanted to take me there, who I had joined and asked Prabhupada to initiate me. So that was 3 months after I joined. It was very early in 1972. It would have been, I think, prior to Gaur Purnim, 1972. And there was the temple had just moved from La Cienega to Culver City, and a bigger temple. And I think that the Bhagavatam classes were just starting at that time. We had little chapters, a couple of published chapters of certain sections of the Bhagavatam. Those are very special days, though, for me, especially now as I get older. I think of them often, and the devotees, God brothers and God sisters, who were there, what it was like. I was very, very charming, endearing, very innocent, and Prabhupada spent a lot of time there. So Prabhupada initiated me, and quite a number of other devotees at the same time. It was rather a big ceremony. My second initiation came, I think, about 6 months later, maybe. And Prabhupada wasn't there for that. I could have waited for him, but I couldn't wait. I was very eager to get the second initiation so that I could engage in the deity worship. There was very special, the deity worship. We had a list of artiks, for the month, and you could fill in your name and get on the list and have the opportunity to offer artik. It wasn't easy, if you will, and so I was quite eager for that, and was blessed to receive the initiation. Prabhupada used to give his second initiation on tape to devotees worldwide when he wasn't present. So I heard a tape of Prabhupada giving the mantra. But in those days, like I said, Prabhupada spent a lot of time there. He spent maybe 3 months in the spring and 3 months in the winter. So again, it was a very, very special years for me. And as I became more prominent, if you will, in the temple and acquainted with the environment and so forth, and embraced a particular service and so forth, then I got the opportunity to get closer to Prabhupada, to go on the walks with him and so forth, and all. But yeah, it was those were very, very, very touching, very beautiful very innocent times. The BBT, Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, was moved from New York, where it started, to Los Angeles, which was Prabhupada's headquarters, and they had facilities across the street from the temple. The temple owned an apartment complex across the street from the temple. And I was given an apartment over there. I was married in those years and had a son. And I remember once deciding that I would invite Prabhupada to come over for lunch to my house, because we used to talk about, about householders should do that, and so forth. But the Prabhupada secretary would not entertain offering my invitation to Prabhupada. He thought it was, absurd, but it was very, it was the kind of thing that if Prabhupada heard about it, he probably would have dismissed his assistant. To hear that kind of enthusiasm and reasoning for it and so forth. Anyway, it's just the thought that came to my mind when I focused for a moment on the apartment in which I lived there for a couple of years, year and a half or something like that. So that's a little bit of the history. What else?
Guru, isn't there a story connected to when you chanted your Gayatri mantras for the first time?
I don't think so.
I mean, I remember we went to the New Dwarka temple about 13 years ago when we had that mediation with ISKCON. And we went to eat in that Govinda's restaurant, and there was this like room inside the Govinda's restaurant that used to be part of the temple. And you said that you told us back then that you chanted your first Gayatris in that room and that you were like completely overwhelmed by ecstasy.
Yeah, my memory doesn't record that, but it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah. It was a room in the restaurant. The restaurant was across the street from the temple.
It was on the same. It didn't used to be a restaurant, I guess. It was some kind of storage.
Yeah, I remember now. Yeah. Anyway, those were very magical days for all of us who were involved, pioneers, if you will.
So the next question is from Yavat and Murali, I think from Chile, if I remember correctly. They say, my obeisances. My question is regarding a post that you published on Facebook that said, if the knower, I forget what, this translation is not exactly what you said, something like, if the knower is known, and then ... What was that? Basically, he's asking, like, could you explain a little more what that whole thing was?
If the knower is not known, ... Yeah, it was just a thought. The idea there is that consciousness is the knower, and everything is within consciousness. So if we don't know the knower, and we tend not to, we tend to think we know this thing, we know that thing. We know our body, we might know our mind, but we don't know the knower in which the body, the mind, and everything else is contained. The only thing that you really know is your own experience. And if people tell you something that's not your experience, you only know that through your own experience of what they're telling you. So the subjective perspective, if you will, of reality stemming from our own consciousness is all we really know. Everything is within consciousness. It's not that you have a body and out of it comes consciousness. And you just think about it for a moment, you'll appreciate the fact that no, my body comes out of my conscious. My body comes out of my conscious. I can perceive my thoughts, right? I can perceive my body. I'm the perceiver. So everything is within consciousness. Gaudiya Vaishnavism's metaphysical worldview, which everyone has, whether they're scientists, whether every worldview, every cosmology that's out there is metaphysical. There's nothing that's not. You cannot explain the world satisfactorily or conclusively just from a physical point of view. Even the Big Bang Theory and so forth, these are all metaphysical perspectives. And be formed by certain data and so forth, but they're metaphysical. While the dominant, philosophical perspective in the world, informed by observation, by scientific data and so forth, is materialism or physicalism or naturalism, the idea that there's nothing supernatural, there's no real self, there's not even a mind, everything's just physical, a brain, the physical forces and so forth. Gaudiya Vaishnava has kind of the opposite perspective, and it's at least as reasonable as the physicalist perspective, which finds consciousness somehow emerging, out of the physical world, and it's more of an idealism. So from materialism to idealism. Now, the problem with idealism that's made it seem unpopular in the past was idealism as espoused by, for example, the famous Berkeley, was an idealism in which everything was within the individual's mind. So nothing was occurring outside of any individual's mind. But there are things that occur outside of our individual mind, in other people's minds, and so on and so forth. And if I don't, what is the famous saying? See the tree fall in the forest, did it fall? Somebody else saw it. So, but the idealism of Gaudiya Vaishnavism is more like everything is in the mind of God. It's all happening in the mind of God. So the super knower, if you will, but consciousness, we're a spark of consciousness, spark of the fire of consciousness. So everything is happening within consciousness. There's nothing outside of consciousness. It's the theater of all experience. I've often said that stones don't think, stones are thoughts. So think about that. Stones don't think, they're thoughts. They're ideas. So the physical world is not really this hard stuff. That whole idea is breaking down even within the scientific community. It's much more mind-like than it is physical. So it's really it's all an idea. So everything is within consciousness. We're preoccupied with trying to know this and that, but at the cost of knowing ourself, which is the knower. So what do we know? If we do not know the self, what do we know? We really don't know anything. If we don't know the knower, which is the Atma in this case, the Atma, you as an individual Atma are the knower. It's not that your mind knows, it's not that your body knows. And within the knower, which is pure consciousness, everything is contained. There's nothing outside of the consciousness. It's the ground of being. Everything is contained within consciousness. So if you're the Atma, the knower, but you don't know yourself, then what do you know? When everything is contained within consciousness and everything arises out of consciousness, if consciousness is the knower and you don't know the knower, then you don't know anything. That's the point. You may think you know this or that, but you don't know anything. You don't know it for what it is, right? So anyway, the little phrase I put up there is just to make the point that we should endeavor to know the knower. And by knowing the knower, by knowing the Atma, Then we'll know, as we do in the context of Gaudiya Vaishnavism through bhakti, we'll know the support of the Atma, the Paramatma, as well. On the inner side, and the outer side, we'll know everything else for what it is as well. We may think the world is this or that and use it in this or that way, but it's actually all related to Bhagwan, to the Paramatma, to God. And to see it in that light is to see it as it is. And then you'll see that, as say some of the Buddhists say, samsara is nirvana. So, yeah, a little bit of Vedanta. It's good to emphasize that. We don't, in Gyan Marg, then this is very much the whole entire focus. It's not the focus of Bhakti Marg. The focus of Bhakti Marg is to love Krishna. But it underlies, obviously, the Bhakti Marg as well. The difference between the body and the self. And sometimes it's good to talk about these things because we can get lost in a little bit of a kind of a mechanical religious perspective and not enter into actual Gaudiya Vedanta. You might have be Gaudiya by religion, but what is the Vedanta of it all? And the metaphysics of it all. What am I? What is the world? And so forth. And when we focus on that, then we tend to shift from a religious, socio-religious kind of orientation to the tradition, to a mystical, experiential orientation. And that's what we need. That's what will change the world and change your life forever in ways that nothing else you could do could possibly compare. There's nothing how you can tweak yourself physically, mentally, psychologically that could compare to knowing the knower, and that's just the beginning, if you will. If you want to love Krishna, well, if you enter into the fire of loving Krishna, you have to become fire yourself, right? You are fire, you are a spark. So you have to know that. What are the possibilities there? If you experience and consistently and realize that you're not the body, the possibilities that you've just entered into exceed every possibility of the world, the external world, the material world, put together and multiplied a trillion-fold. And people are fooling around trying to mix up the material world in one way or another to experience it, to know it, and to get happiness from it ultimately. That's all. And it's all ignorance. And the fact is, that's evident from the fact that it's not making people happy. They're at odds with one another. They're at odds with one another. It's no different than the days of the so-called barbarians. The people are at odds with one another. In this country, in my country, United States, they're shooting people just in madness. Happens practically every week now. Anyway, it's crazy. So yeah, make a comprehensive solution to the problems of life. Know yourself. And that's what we're all looking for. People go to the moon, they go to Mars. What are they looking for? I've said before that in the English language, the most used word is one of the smallest words. It's I. And it's the thing that's least known. Nobody knows I. What am I? Everyone's trying to figure out, what am I? Am I a man? Am I a woman? Am I changed from one to the other, or which is popular these days, or whatever it may be, right? So to know yourself, everyone who can disagree, everyone's trying to do that. So we also have an idea to know yourself. And what we speak about, as much as we dismiss the illusory sense of I and self, that I am an American, I'm a North American, Latin American, I'm a European man, woman, and so forth. This small, narrow sense of I, which can start to sound pessimistic. As much as look at the big picture, as much as we do that, if you understand what we're talking about when we speak about the I, the Atma, it turns into the most optimistic perspective you could possibly. I mean, you couldn't imagine a more optimistic perspective of what you are. What is your prospect? Your nisarga, that eternal impression. We think of impressions as samskars, as things that come from outside onto us. We've been impressed. But in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, for example, speaks about anadi siddha samskars with regard to the inhabitants of the spiritual world, the nitya siddhas. They're anadi, they're without a beginning. They have siddha, perfectly, fully manifest impressions for serving Krishna. They didn't come from anywhere else. So there's an idea of impressions that don't come from outside. And if you study Ujjvala-nimani, you can find in the 14th chapter this whole idea of impressions, nisarga. There's your svabhav. There's two sides, sarup and nisarga. Sarup is that self that comes out without even having to hear about Krishna. We see it in the example of the inhabitants of Braja. But if you go to Dwarka, for example, they have to hear about Krishna in order for that their inherent impressions that make them disposed to loving Krishna in a particular way come out. That's called nisarga. But the nisarga is explained there also to be eternal, anadi. And it also, as explained there, pertains to the sadhana siddhas, practitioners. They have nisarga. They have an impression, gata samskar. It doesn't come from outside. It's there to be unlocked by further impressions that we will resonate with because of the impression on our particular atma. Very, very bhakti vinod-esque, if you will. So anyway, we're getting away from the main point, but know yourself. You'll know everything from there. Know thyself. That is the focus of everyone. We're just giving it a very disciplined way of going about it. It's a very objective way of going about it. Because we say, well, know yourself. Let's analyze it. I'm not this. I'm not that. These different passing senses of identity, which can change and so forth. Anyway, there's a whole, especially in the Gyan-marg, there's the whole process of analyzing in this way. Gaudis that don't emphasize that because it's given. It's a given. It's a given. They're talking about something more, but it's important for us to emphasize that sometimes. So I put that out there, and it's interesting that many devotees didn't quite understand it. It's a bit abstract, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to elaborate upon it.
Okay, the next question is from Ganga Shakti. She says,
want to give it a second?
I read some.
Want to give it a second?
Oh, okay.
Pause for a moment. Oh.
Okay, I think Shamsundar is probably caught up by now. So Ganga Shakti says, I read somewhere that Krishna married Radha in the form of Abhimanyu during the year when the boys were kidnapped by Brahma. He also married all other gopis in the form of other boys. Is this view supported by Shastra, or can we rather see it as folklore?
There's no, no, it's not stated in scripture. And I've not seen it in any of the commentaries on scripture either. And there's a practical problem with the idea. Now, someone may say that in a moment of bhava, to reason as to how Krishna's parakya is not what it sounds like, something like that. But what's the idea there? The idea is there that Krishna took the form of all the boys, and he married all the gopis at that time. But then the idea would be, of course, when the boys again reappeared, they would be married to all those girls, right? For the Lila to continue. In other words, the idea is that Krishna actually married them. And so whoever they're actually married to, that's false. They're actually married to Krishna. Something like that. That's the idea that's trying to be supported, if you will, like Krishna manifested as Abhimanyu. So she's actually married to Krishna. That's, there's support for that. But if Krishna married all the girls, appearing as Sridham, Sudam, Kinkini, and so forth, as he did for a year, after the year, well, all those boys would be married to all those girls, and all those girls were having a relationship with Krishna, and at least among the Priyanarmasakas, they were helping them have a relationship with Krishna, which would have been with their own wives and so forth. We don't see that the cowherd boys in Krishna's Sakyarasa are depicted as married. Only in the later part of Gopal Champutas, Jiva Goswami, when he starts talking about Swakiya, which is a whole other subject, he says that Radha and Krishna married, and Sridham finally got married too, by Krishna's urging. But we would have to look at that as being an exception and an emphasis on Swakiya Radha, the idea that Radha Krishna married in the spiritual world, which is not a central theme or perspective in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which posits parakya in the apricot, in the Nitya Lila. So yeah, you can't have Subal married to a gopi and arranging, secretly for his wife, to meet with, and he's not really married, and he's one of these ogres, kind of husbands that try to check the gopis from going to, so it kind of breaks down. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I think I lost you for a second. I can't hear you, Gurnishna.
Yeah, we can hear you now. Sorry, I was muted. Yeah. But yeah, it got jammed, but it's fine now.
So it breaks down, but the spirit of it is good. The intention behind whoever may say that is to say that Krishna's parakya, the gopis' parakya is not, really parakya. It's an illusion. They're actually the Siddhanta is they're actually married to Krishna only, which is true. They're really only connected to Krishna. There's an appearance of parakya. So there's an appearance of some husband, some husbands. Interesting question. What else?
Okay, the next question is from Indranuja from Kansas. He says, I have a question about the purport to the 29th verse of Gopala-tapani Upanisad. I'm assuming it's your purport. In that purport, it states, quote, in his Tattva Sutra, Bhaktivinoda Thakur also offers a novel understanding of Sayujya Mukti with Raga-bhakti. those Vaishnavas who are engaged in the sadhana of the sentiments of the gopis of Vrindavan can also refer to their practice as brahma-sayujya sadhana.
You want to comment on that? When I say also referring to Bhaktivinoda's writings, I must have prefaced that with something said perhaps by Baladev Vidyabhushan, I would assume, in Vedanta Sutra. I don't have the text.
I have it here, Maharaj.
But in his Govinda Bhasha, his commentary on Vedanta Sutra, Baladev Vidyabhushan, the Gaudiya Vedanta acharya, if you will, he explains sayujya, one of the 5 types of liberation, salokya, shasti, samipya, sarupya, and sayujya, right? Differently than, for example, it is explained in Chaitanya Charitamrita by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. The way that Krishnadas describes it, which is the more typical way in which it's described in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, it's something undesirable, right? It is a merging with Brahman on the part of the jiva. It's not desirable from the Gaudiya point of view. It's very similar but different from what Shankaracharya is speaking about. So the Gaudiyas, at least, let's say Krishnadas Kaviraj and others, especially after him, and Jiva Goswami as well in the Bhagavad Sandarbha, he would differentiate between Shankar's idea of merging with Brahman, in which there is no individual Atma. In Shankar's idea, there's only Brahman, and there's an appearance of individual Atmas only that are a result of karmic embodiment. So in Shankar's teaching, you are me in another body. Therefore, I should respect you. Okay, well, that's not a bad perspective, and I do, but it denies the eternal individuality of the Atma that all other forms of Vaishnava Vedanta acknowledge. So we dismiss that as not even being a reality. But we go so far as to say, but there is a reality of merging with Brahman, where the jiva, the Atma, merges with Brahman and doesn't know that it's different from Brahman. But it is. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur describes that type of liberation as incomplete type of liberation in which all that the Atma is not realized, even though it's liberated. That it is an eternal servant of Hari by its very nature is not known. And therefore, it's possible, and Sanatana Goswami makes this point as well, that those jivas in Brahma-sayujya can come from there to Vaikuntha, to Shantaras, to Dasarasa, and so forth, by Krishna's grace. It's possible. So that's the typical idea of Sayujya Mukti, right?
Right.
A Gaudiya Vaishnavism, we say, okay, you can merge with Brahman, but only in this sense, not as Shankar says. And it's a type of liberation in which the full identity of the Atma is not real. Let's say, for example, Jiva Goswami cites Ramanuja, his Siddhanta with regard to the Jiva, and he says that the Jiva is Kartritva, Bhoktritva, Gyatritva. How are you going to be a Kartritva, a doer in Brahman? An agent of action. There's nothing to do there. There's no movement. So the fact that there's an eternal characteristic or quality of the self as a doer, well, it's not going to be realized there. You're going to stop doing in relation to the world. or stop reacting to the world and what it's doing once you've turned it on, where you think that you're the doer, and enter into Brahman and be still. Shanti, shanti, shanti. So I'm just giving an example. You're not going to know that you're ultimately a doer in that situation. So there's more to it, more to the self. And of course, it has an identity as a servant of Hari also, as I mentioned. So that's the typical understanding of Sayujya. And that's why perhaps what's said there, you have a question about, but it may have been prefaced, I'm not sure, by
there is
statement of
I mean,
Baladev. I can't hear you, so I'll just continue. I can't hear what you're saying. Your speaker's not turned on or something. But what the point that Baladev Vidyabhushan makes is a point that is you'll find in other sampradayas. So Gaudiya Vaishnavism is we're a little more generous actually towards Shankar. We say that there's something called brahma-sayujya, and there's a kind of merging with Brahman, which is their whole idea. We just clarify it. We give it a big footnote, but it means like this. Whereas you're not going to find that in Ramanuja Sampradaya. You're not going to find that in the Madhva Sampradaya. Madhva's not going to accept that even possibility exists. Mukti means there's 5 kinds. And one of the kinds is Sayujya. And so the idea of Sayujya there is that it underlies all the other types of liberation, like living on the same planet with Bhagawan, having the same opulences of Bhagawan, having a form like Bhagawan, being a personal attendant of Bhagawan. All of these 4 are underlined by a sense of oneness with Bhagawan. Like I said earlier, if you want to enter the fire, you got to be hot. You know, a spark into the fire and flourish. So there is a sense of oneness with God, that in a difference from matter, that underlies all types of liberation. And that is Sayujya, as explained by Madhva, for example, or by Ramanuja. So Baladev embraces that explanation of Sayujya in his Govinda Bhashya, his commentary on Vedanta Sutra. And so what you cited there from what I wrote, I didn't remember that, but apparently it's the case, that Bhaktivinoda Thakur has talked about Gopi Bhav, for example, in a similar way, but it would be true with all of them.
Okay.
It's the underlying that, sense of identity with, a wholesome sense of identity with God. That help?
Right. Yeah, that helps. It helps. I mean, I have to
Can't
say
hear
most.
You have to do something so
okay.
at least I can hear. I don't know if anybody else can.
Very much. I think
There.
you might have dropped off of the, so you can hear me, but not Indra, because I can hear Indra. So try again to go to English and the unmute, because you dropped off for a second. It might have undone that.
Okay, now I should be able to hear you. Andrew,
Okay, so thank you,
yes.
Guru Maharaj. Good morning. No, it's just that this last part, your purports are usually very, very clear, I have to say, and it's one of the things that I've always admired about your books. Everything's quite clear, but with this particular low thing, you're talking about Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and he's talking about Kaivalya with Rag Bhakti, which I thought was kind of curious. I'd never heard that before. And there's a reference also to 12.13.12 in the Bhagavatam, where Jiva Goswami, in his Bhakti Dharma, he makes a reference to this. But this other thing was
same
curious.
idea for those who, let me comment on that for those who are listening. Kaivalya, of course, is a phrase that's popular amongst the Gyanis and Shankar. It means like oneness, and it's said in that 12th canto of the Bhagavatam that the Bhagavatam is all about Kaivalya. But Jiva Goswami says Kaivalya means love, so he's interpreting this kind of oneness with love. That's what it means. I'm sorry. Go ahead with the rest of the question.
No, that's a beautiful part of that. I love that part. It was just this little part here about the Tattva Sutra, back to Tattva Sutra, where he says that on the Sutra 19, he comments that Sayujya means union with Brahman, those Vaishnavas who are engaged in the sadhana of the sentiments of the gopis of Vrindavan can also refer to their practice as brahma-sayujya sadhana. That was really the thing that was the most confusing. I couldn't understand how sadhana you could have any kind of focus on brahma-sayujya. Just seemed odd to me, that's all.
Well, he's doing what I'm saying. He's saying that there's another way of looking at what Brahman is and what Sayujya is. So Krishna is also Brahman. He's Param Brahman. So to become one with him, that's the whole idea of the gopis. Radha is trying to become one with Krishna. Love means there is no other. Those who say I love you know nothing about love, because in love there is no other. So
yeah, that makes perfect sense.
So Radha is trying to become Krishna, one with Krishna. Krishna is trying to become one with Radha, right? That's what they're trying. That's the Sayujya. So you can call it. This is a super idea of Brahma Sayujya Sadhana Gopi Bhav. But just as a point here, it's interesting to make, and I will for a moment. Krishna's trying to become one with Radha. Radha's trying to become one with Krishna. But what's the problem? When they try to become one with one another, each one starts to feel like the other. That's called vivarta. It's an error. Prema vilas, vivarta. In the middle of their vilas, of their prem, which is love, which means no other, the two trying to become one start to feel like each other. Krishna starts to feel like Radha. Radha starts to feel like Krishna. It's like an error, vivarta. It's a confusion. And so Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the resolution. He's the Prema Vivarta, Prema Vilas Vivarta Vigraha. It's a success here. The two are fully merged. And it's a new person, Sriman Mahaprabhu, or Chandra. That's, wow. Oh, that's something to tell the world about. And Mahaprabhu covered the mouth of Ramananda Roy. He said, oh my God, that's what you want to say to everybody? Oh, I don't know if everybody's ready. And it's me? Goodness. Yes, it is him. Well, how important is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu?
Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Okay. Gaur Hari. Haribo.
Okay.
What else we have here?
That was wonderful. Yeah, the next question is from Brigupad from Finland.
Okay.
Hey, Krishna, Dandavat Guru Maharaj. I have a question about Damodara-lila. It's a question I was asked recently, and I didn't feel I could give a good answer. The question is that the whole month of Kartik deals with, there's many different leelas that we celebrate during the month of Kartik, but it's mostly about Vatsalya Bhava. And there is, of course, there's the next month with the Katyayani Vrata and so on, but that isn't really, it's not a very popular thing. Everybody knows about Kartik. How come this kind of Vatsalya Bhava month is so much in the center of our sacred year?
Well, I think that I believe that the Rasa Lila occurs during the Kartik too. And I believe the Gopala Vaishnava is just after. Is it during Kartik or is it just after Kartik? Agrahayana. It would be the month after the Damodar month. But the Rasa Lila occurs, so that's very central, but that's a secret thing. Of course, we try to broadcast it. And the Damodar-lila, yes, and the month Damodar, Kartik, same, the different names for the same month, right? So that is a prominent lila. So, I mean, the question was, why is the Damodar-lila so prominent? I mean, it occurred at that time. What it's very extraordinary. One thing about it we can say is that from a Gaudiya perspective, which isn't focused on Vatsalya Rasa, right? And I think that's kind of the point behind the spirit behind the question. Gaudiya Vaishnava is not really centered on Vatsalya Rasa. It's centered on Madhurya Rasa or Sakya Rasa, primarily Madhurya Rasa. But one way to look at that is that the metaphysic of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, underlying the whole Gaudiya Vedanta, Achintya Veda, Veda Tattva, is brought out in the Damodara-lila. Because obviously Krishna is appearing before Yashoda in a form that she can't wrap the rope around, no matter how much rope she adds. It's not getting any bigger. He's not getting fatter, every 2 inches fatter every time she adds to the rope. So if you look at that Lila, you can explain what's being said here in the Lila is Achintya Veda Veda. Everything is in Krishna. Krishna's outside of everything at the same time. You could make a lot out of that from a Gaudiya point of view, and that maybe that's one way to answer it. But I think that the fact that this Lila occurred during this month doesn't change the fact that the month, according to I think the Padma Purana, is attributed to Radha. It's emphasized therein, and the Gaudis have taken from that and emphasized it themselves. And again, it's the month in which the Rasli is the consummation of the love affair between gopis and Krishna. That Krishna said, if you look at the Prakat Lila in the month of Agrahayana, he met with gopis. He promised later he would the Gandharva marriage that they were having at that time, if you will, would be consummated. That's come around next year. That occurs during the Damodar month. So in that sense, it's prominent. But there's also a way, and I can't remember it right now, that some Gaudis have explained the Damodar-lila from a Madhurya Rasa vantage point. And I have to look about that. The actual Lila of Krishna and Yashoda, some Madhurya perspective on it. I haven't seen it written, but I heard it once from a sadhu, and I can't remember now, but it'll probably come to me. And if I can recall it, I'll remind you of it. But I think that what I've said should suffice as somewhat of an answer. And I think a little more as we speak. It's one thing about the Damodar-lila is that with the conclusion of the Damodar-lila, which is the felling of the Arjun trees, and then the discussion that ensues afterwards amongst the elders, like, what's going on here? There was this Putana witch came, this whirlwind tornado came here. These Arjun trees have fallen right, in the backyard of Nanda Maharaj, and the Krishna could have fallen underneath them. So the wise Upananda, the elder brother of Nanda Maharaj, reason we should move to Vrindavan. So the Damodar-lila culminates in the idea we should all move across the river, across the Jamuna. There's a place at the base of Govardhan, this mountain that will serve our cows, which is relative to our own livelihood. We should move there. So with the Damodar-lila comes the moving to Vrindavan, where all the leelas, that's the Sesh Kumar, the end of Krishna's childhood. The Damodar-lila ends Krishna's childhood. Now we move on to Poganda, in which there's a touch of Kishore, and Krishna's romantic life begins, and his Kishore Lila. So that's another way to think about it. Hope that helps a little bit.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Haribo. Yeah. Okay. Well, I see there's some more questions here. Let me see. I see them in the chat, and we're out of time. But maybe I'll answer one. Bhakti
Very much. I have them.
Oh,
I have them all. I've taken them down. So there's 3 more questions, but it's good actually to save it for the next week, so we don't have to scramble in the beginning, if you don't mind.
okay. Okay, I can give them more time then, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, nice to be with all of you.
Good. Thank you very much. Haribo.
Yeah. Gaur Premanande. Haribo.
Haribo. A quick announcement. Next week's Tattva class is going to be me interviewing Bhakti Abhay Ashram Maharaj, and that should be interesting. I haven't quite figured out exactly what to talk about, but if you have any suggestions, what you would like to hear from him, let me know. Send me a note, and we'll have a nice discussion